Happy Friday. Welcome back to We the Future. I have failed to make the deadline of 4 p.m., which is usually when I try to have these episodes out for your viewing and listening privileges. Today just got past me and I wasn't able to record this episode this morning. So I apologize sincerely that you are either viewing or listening to this Friday evening or on Saturday. Either way, thank you for joining us again and welcome back. We've got a lot to discuss today, a great show prepared. This week was quite exciting and quite heavy in the news cycle in terms of big breaking stories. Tonight, the deadline of releasing the Epstein files was successfully met by the Department of Justice. So small round of applause for Pam Bondi. But if you have tried to access or view any of them, like I have, you have found nothing but a bunch of black boxes and redacted information. It kind of reminds me of the 2020 COVID era when a bunch of people decided they would post a bunch of black boxes on their social media accounts. Kind of feels eerily the same. Just a bunch of black everywhere. So 90% of the files have been redacted, other than a few Democratic officials that we kind of already figured were pedophiles and perverts. There hasn't been a lot of breaking information, but we're going to continue to dive into those and we'll address a lot of that on Monday's show. Today, we've got some subjects that I want to talk about. We've got the war that is almost here and upon us in Venezuela. So if you are on a Caribbean cruise, head for safer waters is my recommendation. It could be only a matter of hours or even days before I personally feel that we will see an attack on Venezuela based off of how much artillery and forces we have in that area. I feel like it's only a matter of time before the pin drops. In other news, we're going to dive deep into what happened with the Bondi Beach attack in Australia last Sunday. We're also going to discuss what probably some of you have seen in the news, but not a lot of information up until recently, the Brown University attacks that have taken place. We finally have, or he's no longer with us, a suspect in that attack. So we've got all of that to discuss and much, much more. A great show. It is officially T-minus 6 days to Christmas. So I hope you are all ready and prepared. I hope you have cold, snowy weather. And if you don't, like I do, just close your eyes, imagine the snow, and hopefully that gives you the feelings that you're looking for. We've got that and much more to discuss, so let's buckle up. Final thing we have to break down is we finally have a Jewish president. You heard me right. Officially, it's announced that Donald Trump is a Jewish president, the first Jewish president to successfully serve 2 terms as president of the United States. We'll hear from Mark Levin here in just a second, and we will all be able to celebrate that wonderful news together. Buckle up. Let's dive into it. Welcome back to We the Future. Let's go.
These people do like Israel.
Hold on. And he loves Israel too.
It's true.
2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. 6 years ago, I was up here, and I said, "This is our first Jewish president."
It's true.
He's the first Jewish president to serve 2 not consecutive presidencies. We thank you for everything.
That's where bad things happened on the second one, namely.
All right. So that's the good news. We've got a Jewish president in Donald Trump. Just in case you were curious, we're hitting all of the different DEI boxes that we need to check. So if you're like me, you look at that video, you listen to that video, and you think to yourself, you know what? There was a lot spoken, a lot said, but some of the stuff was kind of mumbled underneath his breath. But as we all know, and as the phrase goes, you say the most important things quietly. So to speak up for the people in the back of the room, President Trump, after Mark Levin said that he is the first Jewish president, Donald Trump says multiple times, it's true. So just in case you thought the MAGA administration could not get even more fake and gay, they go ahead and surprise you with that little curveball. So congratulations to our first Jewish president, Donald Trump. So let's dive into it, folks. We've got a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about. The number one thing I want to kind of hit on today is the attacks that we saw in Australia last weekend. It happened Saturday in Australia, but Saturday for us back here in America. And we're going to dive into all of that. And I first want to go and on the record, as if it has to be stated, say the attack that happened is horrible. It's horrific. My heart goes out to the people who were in that attack, the people of Australia, to the Jewish community. It shouldn't happen. We should live in a world where we are safe, where we have feelings of safety, especially when it surrounds our religious freedoms. Unfortunately, Australia doesn't have the same freedoms that we have here in America in regards to our gun laws, but we're going to talk more about that. But it doesn't even need to be said. I think it's horrific what happened. I've got lots of friends and I consider family in the country of Australia. I've talked to a few of them this week. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they weren't a part of the attack. They don't live close to the beach where it took place. But overall, people over there, as they should be, and as would be expected, are a little shaken up. But I want to talk about the attack and why I feel it's important, because in my opinion, it reeks of, it walks, it talks of a false flag attack. And so I want to dive deep into that. What is a false flag attack? I saw this earlier on social media, and I think it highlights exactly what should be stated when it comes to false flag attacks. A false flag attack in no way, shape, or form doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that nobody died. What it means is that it was staged in order to achieve an objective by swaying public opinion via fear and anger. Now, fear and anger are going to be a common thread in terms of subjects that we're going to talk about tonight, especially with what happened in Australia. But most importantly, I feel like there should be a good baseline. Now, I'm going to, of course, my job and what I try to do each episode is to not paint everything as exactly how you should believe. These are my opinions. It's my show. These are my thoughts. You're more than welcome to engage with me. In fact, I highly encourage it by liking, subscribing, commenting on these episodes, commenting on social media. And hey, you can even send an email or message me on social media. I welcome all of it. But my job is to paint the picture of what I believe is to be true and why I believe it to be true. And that is my goal and hope for tonight's episode. So let's first talk a little bit about false flag. In false flag attacks or false flags in general, we see a couple different things. First and foremost, we see the media all flock to one succinct story. There's no multi-pieces. There's no different evidence that gets immediately released. From the mainstream media, it all just seems to be a copy and paste type scenario. So you see the same type of stories and news articles on Fox, MSNBC, NBC, CNN, a bunch of other different major news cycles. It all just seems to be painting one clear picture. You also are given a clear person to or group of people to be upset at. It's very black and white in terms of the good guys and who are the bad guys in the attack or the situation that you are looking into. What you also see in false flag is you see a lot of these common events all center around specific subjects or topics or controversial things. So in this case, it happens to fall around a couple different ones. You obviously have gun violence. Now in Australia, you don't have a lot of gun violence because the government in Australia banned guns not too long ago for their citizens. But you also see in this, you see a giant subject of the Jewish community, since they were the ones that were involved in the attack, as well as the hot subject, which is happening all around the world, of anti-Semitism. So in this attack, we see a lot of those boxes that should be checked, or at least often are checked with false flag attacks or false flag events. They get checked pretty quick. But let's first dive into what happened, what took place, and why I personally believe it was a false flag event. So the Australia shooting. So we've got Jewish civilians that are murdered at a holiday celebration. They're at the beach or on the beach at Bondi. You've got Muslim civilian who disarmed the shooter and was shot twice. He became the hero of the day. We're going to talk a little bit about him here in a second. And immediately, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, immediately calls for the Western governments to tighten speech laws. So this, in my opinion, and according to a lot of others, was much more than an attack. So let's be clear. The victims were Jewish civilians. They were gathered for religious celebration. This was a brutal crime against that community and those people. And obviously, it's a terrorist attack. And of course, it's always evil. Killing in any sort, any way, shape, or form is satanic. And it is the exact evil that we are called to dispel and fight against from our Savior, Jesus Christ. But let's talk about this. There's a few points or reasons why I personally believe it was a false flag. And my job is to show those to you right now. So instead of getting timelines, clear evidence, clear facts as to why or how this event went down, we are immediately flooded by, obviously, social media is a big reason why we get instant gratification or instant access to the news. We get edited screenshots. We get emotionally loaded claims. We get instant dehumanization. And so this is how engineering of division happens all the time. It's happened all the time. And what happens is we all get overwhelmed immediately, right? There's no reading the news article in your local newspaper. There's no finding out about it on the news when you watch it that night. It's never given to you in a clear, concise way that's easily digested. It's all just given to you all at once. And that causes your system, your body, to completely be overwhelmed. And so when that happens, it's very easy for people to eat the lies and to eat the false narratives that are immediately given to us. And so this is what, in my opinion, we would call narrative hijacking, right? This is a how-to tutorial book on how to do that. So this is what we get. And while we're watching this type of narrative warfare, these are the stages, and I'm going to spell them out for you, and then I'm going to lay out the facts, or at least in my opinion, what are the facts as to what the attack entailed. When attacks like this happen, and they've happened all the time, and we're just talking about attacks in general, right? Put aside false flags, put aside false narratives. Let's just talk about horrific attacks that happen all the time. You have fear, which turns into anger, which then leads to blame that leads to laws, and the laws eventually lead towards silence or control of the population. So let's talk about 9/11, right? September 11th, 2001. As soon as the attacks happened in New York City, people were angry and they were fearful, and that turned to blame, which we then pointed towards Al-Qaeda and the Middle East. Once that happened, we then saw laws get enacted and written into place, like the Patriot Act, which then turns into what most people, in my opinion, is silencing happens. If you look at the Patriot Act, immediately Americans were completely fine with giving away their opportunity to live private lives so that the government was able to, in what they were presenting the people at the time, control what was happening all around us to keep us safe and protected in our day-to-day lives. Americans immediately gave up and said that's fine, and now we see a lot of different things that most of us don't even recognize or notice on a day-to-day basis, where it happens all the time. We're constantly being surveillanced. We're constantly being monitored and tracked by our own government, and this is because of the Patriot Act. So let's talk about what happened in Australia. This is exactly what many people would like to see happen for other countries, but now instead of laws about, monitoring and surveillance, these are laws now that are focused towards, in Australia's case, not really gun laws because they already have it tight enough, but you now see it on laws like anti-Semitic laws or hate speech or controlling what people say in terms of criticizing specific governments or countries. So let's talk about this, and let me give you the facts now as to why I believe that this was a false flag attack. So I'm going to share with all of you. Let me just make sure that I've got it found first. Perfect. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different posts or articles. The first one is from the Jerusalem Post, which we're going to read a couple of them. Luckily for you, if you're listening and not viewing, I'm going to read them for you. This was December 14th, so right after the attack. Mossad is jumping right into the picture, which screams super fishy to me. I don't know about all of you, but Mossad, according to the article, has been warning Australia regularly for months about Iranian and other potential terror plots against Jews. The Jerusalem Post has learned following the attack that murdered, at the time it was 11, at a Hanukkah event on Sunday. Already in August, the Mossad gave helpful warnings to Australia regarding terror threats from Iran. So let's talk about why this is important. Well, why this is important is there were other things that were brought to Australia's attention. Let me share the screen again. So we just saw that. Mossad jumps into the picture and they say, hey, we've been warning Australia for a couple of months that there might be terrorist attacks on the Jewish community in Australia. But why did Mossad jump in? Well, immediately following the attacks at Bondi Beach, Israel begins and launches an investigation on whether Iran involved in the deadly Bondi Beach shooting. Israeli intelligence has warned that Tehran has been targeting Jewish communities abroad, reportedly smuggling weapons and using social media cells to incite violence. Israeli authorities are investigating whether state actors, chiefly Iran, were involved in the mass shooting attack against Sydney's Jewish community at Bondi Beach on Sunday. A senior U.S. official told Fox News that if the Islamic Republic ordered the attack, then the U.S. would fully recognize Israel's right to strike Iran in response. So first and foremost, we get America jumping in and Israel jumping in and saying, look, we're looking into whether or not Iran was a part of these attacks. We're looking into that. And if they are, we are going to attack and we're going to bomb Iran. And America jumps in and says, we are in full support. And then, of course, you've got Mossad jumping in saying, yeah, we're going to look into this. And by the way, we've been warning you, Australia, for months that this might be happening. Well, let's take a look as to why this is important. We're going to play a quick little video from somebody called BB speaking to the Australian Prime Minister and talking a little bit about why he feels this attack was preventable.
Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. I wrote, your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorism. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets. Anti-Semitism is a cancer. It spreads when leaders stay silent. It retreats when leaders act. I call upon you to replace weakness with action, appeasement with resolve.
Okay, so why do I share that with you? Well, this begs the question, especially when we're hearing from Bibi Netanyahu, is the reason why you are calling and warning Australia that these attacks might happen, and is it the reason why you're blaming the Prime Minister of Australia for what happened in these attacks? Are you blaming him because of anti-Semitism? Or are you blaming him because, and I think this is extremely important for us to all understand, that months ago, the Australian government recognized Palestine as its own state. And of course, when that happened, Israel, Bibi, they didn't like that one bit. And so this begs the question, why would Bibi warn Australia that there would be attacks? Why would Mossad start reaching out to Australia shortly after they recognized Palestine as an independent state? Why would Mossad now start to reach out to Australia and say, hey, by the way, be aware of potential attacks that could happen in your country because of anti-Semitic laws or anti-Semitism? So this begs the question, is Bibi warning the Prime Minister or blaming him because of anti-Semitism? Or is he blaming him because this is something that happened due to Australia recognizing the Palestinian state? Here's the other thing that doesn't make sense, okay? So if you're following along, first and foremost, after this attack happens, immediately after, Israel launches a investigation into whether Iran was involved. Okay. We're of course told in this attack that this was Islamic extremists that handled this attack and they were the ones behind this. So let's dive into, my opinion, point number 2. Okay. So point number 1, Israel immediately launches an investigation into Iran and whether or not they were involved. And of course, if they were involved, Israel says we're going to immediately take action and we're going to attack Iran. And what does America say? Well, America, little brother to Israel, they jump in and say, yeah, we're going to support Israel in that attack if Iran was involved. Okay, well, let's look at, in my opinion, point number 2 as to why this was a false flag attack. Let's enter into the subject. Ahmed al-Ahmed. He's a Muslim civilian. He's a father and a shop owner. And instead of running and hiding, he stopped the attacker. Hopefully you've seen the video by now. He grabs the gun from the attacker, points it at him, and the attacker falls down and he retreats back to the bridge where they were hiding and shooting from. And Ahmed never fires the gun, but he gets fired upon and takes 2 shots to kind of the upper area. I think it was in his shoulder. So this completely destroys the narrative, which is why that completely got buried. Not many people knew that there was somebody that jumped to their feet and tried to rescue people. And here's point number 2 with this character, with Ahmed al-Ahmed. Immediately, instead of the narrative being pushed that he's a Muslim and he actually acted in the right way and did his best to stop the attack from happening, immediately Bibi, in that same speech that we just watched, tries to twist the narrative and say that Ahmed al-Ahmed is actually Jewish and that he was trying to save people because he's a Jewish hero, which is not true, not factual at all. So point number 2. Now you've got the narrative, which is starting to unravel, because instead of a Muslim civilian being a hero, when you're trying to also say in the same attack that this is happening because of Muslim or Islamic extremists, now you have to backpedal and try to twist the narrative to make it look like this guy is a part of the Jewish community, a part of, like I said before, black and white, bad guy versus good guys. Well, let's go into my opinion. Point number 3. So point number 3 is this. Google Trends. Let's talk about that for a second. If you did not know, on Google, you can search Google Trends and you will get taken to a separate web browser, still ran by Google. And on Google Trends, you can search for specific phrases, people, or events, and you can actually search in different countries where it was being researched. So for example, if I wanted to try to look up something that I was planning an attack on, let's just say 9/11. If I wanted to make sure that my plans to hijack American airline planes was not foiled and that people weren't catching on to what was going to happen, a few days before September 11th, 2001, I might look up Twin Towers attack, American Airlines hijack, right? I might look those things up to make sure that nobody is aware of what's going to happen, right? Figuratively speaking. This is what happened on December 9th. So 4 days before the attack, what happens on Google Trends? Well, somebody in Israel multiple times starts searching for this person's name, Navid Akram. Navid Akram is one of the alleged shooters in the Bondi Beach attack. So 4 days before the attack even happens, somebody in Israel is looking up the name Navid Akram. Why would that be the case? Well, to me, that's extremely fishy. And to me, that would lead me to believe that this was all planned, right? If you're looking these things up to make sure nobody is aware of them, there's probably a good reason why. You don't want things getting out. But before anybody could get that broadcasted or put out into the media, thank goodness for social media, it got scrubbed by Google. So now if you go to Google Trends and you look up the name Navid Akram and you search it in Israel and you go back 30 days or 2 weeks ago, you will get no data. You can try it out right now. So for me, that already is enough suspicion to start to question the narrative that we're being told. Okay, so which leads me into point number 4. Point number 4, I go back to what Bibi said about anti-Semitism. Is he upset because of what happened with Australia recognizing Palestine as its own independent state, or is he truly upset about anti-Semitism? Because right now, that seems to be the hottest topic or phrase that can be brought up in a conversation. It's anti-Semitism. We're seeing it all across the world. Specifically, we're seeing it in America. We're seeing laws try to be enacted and written into policy. We're seeing the Anti-Defamation or Defamation League, the ADL, target people who are anti-Semitic. We're being told that Generation Z is the most anti-Semitic generation for a long, long time. We're getting people that are being referred to as Hitler, Nazi youth. We're seeing, public officials being called that if they support laws that are maybe not so favorable for our quote unquote allies in Israel. And so right now we see all of this happening, and what can stop people from being anti-Semitic? Well, if you start writing policies and laws that ban that and completely take that ability away from people to be so critical. So now what we're seeing is after the attack, the narrative gets spread immediately. And now we're seeing that Western governments are told that they have to change their laws immediately. That now criticism or any type of critique is reframed as anti-Semitism. And so this is not something that's unique to this specific attack. This is textbook for a lot of different attacks that we've seen. For example, the Charlie Kirk assassination. As soon as Charlie Kirk and other people after his assassination started questioning Israel and why they were so quick to respond to, well, we didn't do it, which is super fishy. I don't know why you would ever do that. If you didn't steal the cookie from the cookie jar, you wouldn't be the first to toss your name into the innocent pool. But Israel did that. As soon as Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Bibi Netanyahu came on the news cycle multiple times within that week, days after it happened, to say, Israel did not do this. We had no involvement whatsoever. Once again, super, super fishy. So now the blame gets pushed towards the fall guy, right? Now, the fall guy in this case is Islamic extremists, okay? It happens often. We are told that we have to hate people who have that religious belief. They are the extremists. They are the fundamentalists that target us, target Americans, trying to go after us, trying to get, all of us killed and overthrow the world. But yet here's where we need to do a little bit of research. So one of the attackers we already talked about, but here is the other attacker that we need to talk about. So let me share my screen. Alrighty. Leaked Facebook profile of the Bondi Beach shooter before it got deleted. So this is the Facebook profile for David Cohen. David Cohen is one of the Bondi Beach shooters. If you're watching, you can look at his face here on his Facebook page. And then if you scroll over on this post, there he is again. Now, obviously, the news cycle reports that police say they found an ISIS flag in the car of the Islamic terrorist who killed multiple people and injured dozens more at the Hanukkah celebration in Sydney. So here's his photo, but then if we go back, is he really an Islamic extremist? Well, excuse me. According to his Facebook profile, he is Jewish. He, looking at this, loves his ethnic background. He's quite Jewish. But now we're supposed to believe that he's not from Israel, that he's not Jewish, that he is an Islamic extremist? Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So that's point number 5 as to why I tend to start questioning, well, what the heck is going on? Okay, so those are my first 5 points. The next points that I want to talk about is this. Let me show you. Now, let's back up. It was reported by multiple eyewitness people that were at the shooting at the beach when it took place that the shooting just kept happening for what was reported 15, 20, 25 minutes, that it just was constant shooting. Shoot, 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 reload, shoot, shoot, shoot. Okay? If that attack and that style of an attack was actually going to happen, you would expect the police, emergency services, any type of emergency response service to be miles away, minutes away. Okay. Now, take it from me, somebody who's lived in Australia. They do things a little bit, in my opinion, quirky. Here in America, if you have an emergency vehicle and you're driving your car and you see behind you an emergency vehicle or even in front of you or coming from any sort of direction, it's the law that we have to pull over and make way, right? You do your best to get to the shoulder, the emergency vehicle passes by, everybody merges back into the lanes of traffic, and we continue on our pursuit. In Australia, that's not the case. In Australia, you don't have to move over. Okay, some people do out of, being courteous. You don't have to move over. So when I lived in Australia, we'd be driving our car, right, on the wrong side of the road, I might add, driving your car and you have an emergency vehicle, police, ambulance, fire truck behind you. You don't have to move over. It's the responsibility of the emergency vehicle to maneuver its way in and out of traffic to get to the emergency. So there would be plenty of times that I would hear from people that once they dial 000, which is their emergency number over there, they would wait minutes for an emergency vehicle to show up, right? 15, 20, 25 minutes. So it doesn't surprise me, but what does surprise me is how close the police should have been to this attack. Let me show you this right here. This is Google Map, and this is me looking up the area of Bondi Beach. So you've got Bondi Beach right here. Right here. This little guy, this red tracker, this is the Bondi Beach Police Station. So less than a block, or I'll give you that much, a full block away from the beach, you have the police station. Yet eyewitness reports state that it was over 20 minutes of just constant shooting. That doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense why that would be happening so long. There's no amounts of traffic that they're having to fight. It's not like they're 20 blocks away and then they have to weave in and out of traffic. They're 1 block away from the beach, and yet their response wasn't quick. That to me just smells completely inconsistent to what we should actually see happen, which is a quick response. So to me, all of these different points, right? I think I laid out 6 points, 7 points. Correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. All of these points to me say points multiple times, 10 times fast. All of these points, in my mind, lead me to believe, or at least question, that this was some sort of a false flag attack. Because now what's happening is Israel, specifically the government of Israel, is calling upon Western societies, civilizations, Australia, America, to now write into law that its own citizens cannot show or display any sort of anti-Semitism. Okay? We're seeing that happen even more right now in America. For example, let me show you this video here, which to me is extremely scary. Bear with me as I scroll through all of the videos that I have saved in order for us to all watch together.
Consequences, including up to jail time.
Anti-Semitism thrives when there are no consequences. So we created consequences, a lot of them. When you look for a job, when you look for a spouse, when you look for a nanny, when you look for anything, our work will always be documented, again thanks to Google and SEO. We pressured CEOs, some resigned, many were terminated, but policies were changed thankfully, from governmental to our institutions. We traced patterns, elevated evidence, and worked with authorities, leading to arrests from Florida, South Carolina, New York, California, and Texas. And we're not slowing down, sadly.
This is brought to you by Stop Anti-Semitism.
Okay, so the reason why I show that video is right now in America, we are seeing laws, policies, and people attacking and going after people who are quote-unquote anti-Semitic. Which, if you don't know anything about, which at this point in time I'd be very surprised, people who criticize the government or the nation of Israel are deemed as somebody who is, one, anti-Semitic. Now, here's a really important caveat that I think we should also view, and this is from our Vice President Vance. This is what he said this past week, and I'm going to show this article here. J.D. Vance says criticism of Israel should not be conflated with anti-Semitism. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said criticism of Israel should not be equated with anti-Semitism, emphasizing a clear distinction between opposing specific policies and harboring hatred towards Jewish people, which the definition of someone who is anti-Semitic is someone who hates the people of the Jewish religion. JD says, I would say there's a difference between not liking Israel or disagreeing with a given Israeli policy and anti-Semitism, Vance said in a reply to his post on the U.S. social media company X late Monday. To write an article about the generational divide in anti-Semitism without discussing the demographics of the various generations is mind-boggling, he added. The most significant single thing you could do to eliminate anti-Semitism and any other kind of ethnic hatred is to support our efforts to lower immigration and promote assimilation, he said. But these guys won't do that because they all lack curiosity and introspection. So maybe read a little bit further than what I wanted to. It's really important, especially if we're going to start to call things, as criticizing Israel, anti-Semitic, because if these laws get written, it is now, you're now, first and foremost, you're going against our First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech. And also, it's now I'm able, as an American citizen, I can criticize full-heartedly my own government officials, which I do. But as soon as I start to criticize other nations' government or other nations' officials, now I can be targeted for job opportunities. I can now be targeted if I'm looking for, as they put it, you've got banking that now comes into play. You've got your ability to live your life, your ability to be a part of a civilization. You can now be attacked for being one who is anti-Semitic. So I completely find that alarming, and I hope all of you do as well, that you can now be targeted, you can now be arrested, or soon, maybe in America, you can now be arrested and targeted for saying things that are critical towards the government of Israel. That to me shows you point blank, straightforward, what is happening right now, which is that our country is completely being puppeted, overtaken, and occupied by the nation of Israel and by the government of Israel. This plays hand in hand into the Epstein files. This plays hand in hand into what we're seeing happen in Venezuela with the attack that's supposed to be happening here soon. I think it's extremely important that we address all of this because, for example, Maduro, right? Maduro, who is the leader in Venezuela, when he got sanctioned because he decided that he was going to take the oil in Venezuela and nationalize it, what happened was he received sanctions, and it was largely by the Zionist lobby. And so that meant that Venezuela, as a country, as a government, could no longer borrow any money or sell any bonds. And so in 2018, this is what Nicolas Maduro had to say. He called out the Zionist control over the United States of America. He said that international Zionism controlled global communication power, including social networks and satellites, and was a mastermind behind civil unrest and alleged coup attempts in Venezuela. He referred to far-right Zionists as imperialist demons who want to hand the country over to the devils. He has also condemned the actions of what he calls the Zionist regime in Israel, describing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the 21st century Hitler and accusing the U.S. and its allies of supporting a genocide against the Palestinian people. And this, of course, is before and during when Venezuela came to the aid of the Palestinian nation, after helping them, sending aid, and doing all that they could to help what was going on with all of the attacks. He also has stated that, referring to the Epstein files, Maduro allegedly has stated that they are being used as blackmail to control the actions of the United States. Why do I bring all of that up? Well, this all plays into a giant picture, and I hope you're starting to understand it right now. We see the Epstein files. Nobody's being held accountable. Nothing's being released. Nothing's being given to us that actually leads towards any public official being held responsible or held accountable. On top of that, we are seeing anti-Semitic laws being written into our nation where you can now be arrested, targeted, blackmailed, lose your job, lose opportunities to go to school because you posted something that was critical of the government or the nation of Israel. On top of that, now you're seeing attacks like this happen. Attacks that happened at UVU University with Charlie Kirk being assassinated. And immediately after, anti-Semitism and Israel now controls the media because we're seeing nothing but Israel propaganda. Then you see the attack that happened in Bondi Beach in Australia. Now we're being told over and over and over again that that was largely because, quote unquote, Australia is anti-Semitic. When in reality, it's probably because they're letting in far too many people from the Islamic states, as well as they recognize Palestine as its own independent nation, which Bibi Netanyahu and Israel, they completely dislike. You're seeing all of these things happen. And I hope I'm Bob Ross over here painting a clear enough picture, laying out the evidence, the color palette, so that you can clearly see what is happening right now in our country. And then to cap it all off this week, because of Hanukkah being kicked off, you get Mark Levin joking, ha 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 ha, with President Trump that he is the first Jewish president of the United States. You get President Trump at a Christmas party, Hanukkah party at the White House, getting up and holding up a stack of papers and saying, this is all that I've done for the nation of Israel. It's so much that I actually have to read it off and I have to bring up a stack of papers because I love Israel and I've done so much for them, which happened this week. This isn't some crazy idea. That actually happened this week. Go find it. I hope you're starting to wake up to what's actually happening. And we were told by, regardless if you like her or not, Candace Owens last week, that a false flag attack would happen. Not last week. Last week was when it was supposed to happen. Weeks ago, we were told by Candace Owens that a false flag attack would happen the second week of December. And what did we see? We see the attack at Bondi Beach in Australia, and we see the Brown University attack, which I want to talk about right now. Brown University attack. We've just barely gotten any sort of information today. Well, today's Friday. We barely got any sort of information this week regarding the attacker, what took place, any information at all. There was such little information that was given to us by the police force that it all just seemed way too random and it just felt like they were leaving out information. So let me pull this up for you so we can read it. Okay, perfect. So the Brown University attack. So obviously happened last Friday. Is that right? Let me see here. Yep. So December 13th. Yep. So that was last Saturday. Excuse me. So a deadly mass shooting occurred at Brown University in Rhode Island. During, quote unquote, a final exam review session on campus, a gunman opened fire inside an engineering classroom, killing 2 students and wounding 9 others. The victims include Brown students Ella Cook, and I do apologize, I'm going to butcher this, Muhammad Aziz Umrzukov, both being described as promising and beloved members of the community. Well, if you look into a little bit more about Ella Cook played a pretty big role in Brown University. Brown University's student, she was a 19-year-old sophomore student. Ella Brown, she was one of the people that were killed. Here we go. So she was a member of the Cathedral Church of the Advent, as well as a Christian. She taught Bible studies, and she also, I don't know why I can't find this. It's gone. Here we go. She served as the vice president of the Brown chapter of the College Republicans of America. So we're already seeing a thread, right? Christian conservatives constantly being attacked, okay? So the suspect, which was later identified, and I mean later identified, as 48-year-old Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, who was a Portuguese national and former Brown physics graduate student. After the campus shooting on December 13th, authorities linked him to the fatal shooting of an MIT physics professor. So this happened 2 days after the shooting, which now they've linked together. But there was a physics professor, Nuno Lorino, who was gunned down and killed at his Massachusetts home. And he was a former MIT physics professor focusing on nuclear renewable energy, which I think is highly questionable in terms of why these people are being attacked. Was it random? Who was the gunman? Why did we barely find out anything? Brown University is one of the most heavily surveillanced universities, and yet it took them basically until Thursday night to get any sort of information about these attacks. But all of these attacks that are constantly happening, I believe, are false flag. They're supposed to distract us. They're supposed to play a narrative. And like we talked about earlier, fear turns into anger, anger turns to blame turns into laws, and laws turns into silence. We're seeing a huge pattern take place right now before our very own eyes. It's important for us to recognize this pattern because as we continue to see it, we are going to continue to now be able to realize when these laws start to get passed that try to silence us, turn us towards against each other, and make us feel like there's nothing going right in the world that we live in. So that is why I believe there is a false flag narrative or attacks that are happening in our country right now. All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about is I want us to break down what's happening right now with Venezuela. And if you didn't see it, if you're listening, check out our Instagram page. I posted a reel yesterday, put a little bit of effort into that reel, into why I believe we are following, or why I believe we are about to end up in a war or conflict with Venezuela. And so here's important, and I'm just going to read out this information because I spent a while putting this all together. But this is why I believe we are heading towards a conflict with Venezuela. And before I get into all of the reasons why, I think it's important to understand the history between the United States and the country of Venezuela. From 1999 to 2012, under Hugo Chavez, Venezuela removed Exxon and Conoco from the country and completely took full control of the oil industry. So now every oil field in the country was nationalized. this becomes important. That decision locked in this reality that Venezuela now sits on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, and that means that the United States lost direct access to those oil fields. When Nicolas Maduro took power in 2013, he doubled down on that policy, promising that Venezuela oil would remain under national control. So now, as a result of that, the main primary oil buyers in or from Venezuela became Russia, China, and Iran. So we have now lost, as a United States country, we've lost the ability and access to it completely. Then in 2014, the oil price crashed from $100 down to $30. And at the same time, the United States issued the very first sanctions against Venezuela. Pressure from the United States increased steadily over the next 3 years, and finally in 2017, the United States completely banned Venezuela from the financial markets. Now think about that for a second. You're completely banned from the financial markets, and we talked about this earlier. This is when the central bank in Venezuela was sanctioned largely by the Zionist lobby so that you could no longer, as a country of Venezuela, borrow money or sell bonds. In 2018, this is where we talked about earlier, Nicolas Maduro started to call out the Zionist control that had control or does have control over the United States. And he said that international Zionism controlled global communication power, including social networks and satellites, and was a mastermind behind civil unrest and alleged coup attempts in Venezuela. Once he started to attack Israel and attack the extreme international Zionism control, the activation of the Western media machine took place. And in 2019, a bounty was placed on Maduro's head for $15 million. Even though no public evidence was ever released or presented, the accusations against him were for drug trafficking and terrorism. Between 2019 and 2023, so not too long ago, the oil production collapsed again. The country now suffered greatly, and millions of Venezuelans leave. According to what we have been told by the media, this was all Maduro's fault. Over the last 2 years, Maduro has consistently criticized Israel and their actions in Gaza. Maduro has openly called them out for genocide. He's sent aid to Gaza and has sided publicly with Palestine. Earlier this year, the bounty on his head increased from $15 to $25 million. And once again, we got no real evidence as to why. But he was placed then, early this year, he was placed on the same terrorist watch list that had bin Laden and al-Qaeda. And as of just a few months ago, the United States officially has its largest naval presence in the Caribbean since the 1962 Cuba crisis, including, and we talked about this, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines. President Trump recently signed an executive order stating that fentanyl was now considered a weapon of mass destruction, or a WMD. Now, why is this important? Let's go back to the entire reason why we've gotten into any conflict ever. It's because we're told that weapons of mass destruction exist. And we've seen with the Bush administration, when we ran into the Middle East, we're told that weapons of mass destruction exist. When we get there, after years of conflict, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on both sides being killed in that conflict, no weapons of mass destruction are ever found. Well, now with President Trump recently, and I mean like last week, writing in law that fentanyl is now a weapon of mass destruction, which I believe fentanyl is bad. A weapon of mass destruction, okay. With him writing that into law, he now has the ability to go after Maduro and the country of Venezuela if he claims there are weapons of mass destruction there, which makes zero sense whatsoever, because if we were actually going to Venezuela to get rid of fentanyl, and if we were blowing up these fishing boats because we truly believe that they were bringing fentanyl into our country, which, by the way, tangent but important information, It's cited that these fishing boats, these small outside engine boats, in order for them to take any sort of drugs or anything whatsoever from Venezuela to the shores of Florida, which is their closest route, they would have to refuel those little motors or engines 21 times to get there. So for us to now blow up these boats, and I will add Pete Hegseth to commit war crimes on double tapping the attacks on these boats, which is a big no-no. When we attack those boats and we claim that they're bringing, drugs into our country, it's bullshit. That's not true. It can't happen. They're not refueling in the middle of the ocean. Let's get back on track. If we were actually going to Venezuela or going against any country for their fentanyl production and bringing those drugs into our country, we would actually go against Colombia. Colombia is one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, fentanyl producer in South America. And besides that point, if we were going after them, why would we blow up a few fishing boats here in the ocean? Would we not just militarize our southern border? Because that's how the drugs are getting here. That's how they're being smuggled into our country. They're not having a fishing boat fly upon the shores of Miami and then everybody jumps out and just runs in opposite directions and brings a backpack full of fentanyl. That's not how it takes place. So if we were actually going to war against a country, we go against Colombia, not Venezuela, which is why this whole narrative of us going against Venezuela and these attacks happening because of drugs, weapons of mass destruction, it's complete BS. We're not going there for that reason. We're going there because they have oil. They took that oil from us, which is their right. That's their oil. And now we want it, as Trump says, we want it back. We want our oil back, right? 303 million barrels in reserves. So, with all of this being said, Representative Thomas Massie, who, we should add, Trump has tried to primary more than any other member of Congress, said this: previous presidents told us to go to war over WMDs that didn't exist. It's the same playbook, except we are told drugs now are the weapons of mass destruction. If it were about drugs, we'd bomb Mexico or China. It's about oil and regime change, and it's obvious that Israel is pushing for it. We do not want Afghanistan 2.0 in South America. Maduro is a huge critic of Israel and Bibi Netanyahu, and now we're going to attack here soon. It might happen in hours, days, or a week or two. I believe we are going to be in an active war against Venezuela, which raises a huge problem for us, because we already have had nations like China and Russia stand up and say this week that if we go and attack Venezuela, that they will ally and support Venezuela. Big problem for the United States, right? If we're funding Israel's entire country and their entire defense programs, and now we expect them to join arms with us to go against Venezuela, China, and Russia, kind of a big issue for us. The pattern is simple with Venezuela. In 1953, Iran's nationalization of oil led to a coup. In 1973, Chile's nationalization of copper led to a coup. In 2003, Iraq oil led to invasion and war. In 2011, Libya's rejection of the West led to a collapse. And in 2025, now what it's all about is it's about Venezuela's oil reserves. I hope we're all waking up. I hope I've laid out enough facts and evidence for all of you to truly believe that what you're being told in the mainstream media is not true. What you're being promised, what you're being told by this administration is BS. This isn't the MAGA first agenda. This isn't the Make America Great agenda that all of us voted for. We voted for no wars. We voted for mass deportation. We voted for making the economy great again. And what we got this week on Thursday night, last night, was a fake and gay speech by President Trump raving about how great the economy is, raving about how he's going to give a check to military armed servicemen and women for $1,776, which at the time he touted as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it was all thanks to his tariffs, when in reality, we got told today, if you didn't know this, the 1776 check that these armed military servicemen and women were getting was actually a housing budget that was passed by Congress. So Trump is now taking credit for this great little check of, here you go. This is great. Nobody's seen it better. That's my Trump impression. It's huge. Wow. What a great check. Huge check, real big, $1,776 for you. It's not even from tariffs. It's not even Trump's credit. It's Congress approving a stipend for housing that now just gets distributed to them. But we get this fake and gay ass speech from President Trump telling us how great the economy is, when in reality, in the last 4 years, your income, your buying power has been reduced by 25%. So if you make $100,000 4 years ago and you make that same $100,000 today in a year, you now have the buying power today of making $100,000. You have the buying power of $75,000. That's a serious problem. That's a serious problem. And yet we're being told by President Trump in his great speech that it's the best economy, that in the last 11 months he's made so many improvements, and yet we see very little that actually points us in that direction. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, especially 6 days before celebrating the birth of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and Christmas, but this is extremely frustrating on multiple different levels and multiple accounts. I hope all of you are waking up. I hope that you follow, you like, you subscribe, you comment, you engage with our posts, because I'm not somebody who's trying to be the mainstream media. I'm not somebody who's trying to be the next Charlie Kirk. I'm just somebody who's trying to step up and say, look, enough's enough. There are people out here that are the voiceless. I want to be the voice for them. So please, as I always ask, like, subscribe, comment, follow our social media pages. You can find us on Rumble, X, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course on YouTube. But please follow and subscribe. The more you do and the more you engage, the more my content gets put out there in the algorithm. But I hope you all had a great week. I hope this isn't a Debbie Downer episode, but I just want us to all be aware of and to recognize things as they are. There are countless false flags happening. And I could be completely wrong on what happened, but I tend to think that I'm not out of a sense of pride or arrogance, but out of a sense of when you start to spell out the facts and you actually look at what's taking place, it starts to be a little bit easier to recognize the pattern. You have fear, which leads to anger, which leads to, can't even remember now. We just talked about it for the last hour. Fear, which leads to anger, which leads to blame, which leads to laws, and law that leads to silence. I hope you recognize the pattern, people. Hope you all have a great weekend. We will see you right back here on Monday. And of course, hopefully we all continue to remember the future is ours and we can take it back. It's our right and our duty to overthrow a government that is corrupt. So keep that in mind over the weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. Take care. Thanks for listening.